Beowulf, chapter 13. Then, as men tell me the story, many warriors gathered in the morning around the gift hall. Leaders from far and near came by the wide roads to view the wonder, these traces of the hated one. The end of his life was no grief to any man who surveyed the tracks of the downed foe. How he, weary-hearted and bested in battle, doomed to death and a fugitive, fled in fear to the Devil's Mere. The surface there surged with blood, and the torrid tide of tumbling waves seethed in reeking gore, spilled by the sword. He doomed to death, had died it, and forlorn, had yielded up his life in a boggy den. Hell received his heathen soul there. Explanation. So this talks about after Beowulf has ripped off the arm of Grendel, Grendel goes, runs away back to his lair, or the Devil's Mere, and and we assume he dies there. And the people talk about how the water from this location is boiling with blood. So gross. Picture that in your head. Some one-armed monster probably leaving this giant trail of blood seeping from his arm back to this lair, goes into his devil's lair, or mere as they call it, and then the top is just bubbling with blood. Back to the reading. Then gray-haired clansmen, many youths, and stalwart warriors rode back in high spirits on horses from the mere, and Beowulf's victory was recounted. Many a man said that among all the seas of the world, south or north, that none of the other shield-bearing warriors under the expanse of heaven's vault were more valiant or more worthy to rule. They did not at all, however, disparage their gracious lord Hrothgar. He was a good king. Explanation. So it tells about three groups of people who went to follow the monster and check to make sure that he's dead and came back. Gray-haired clansmen, that gives an illusion of wise old men. Many youths, so young to old, and then stalwart warriors as well. So people warriors that were respected, and they probably went just in case he wasn't dead. Although every indication up until this point is that they're not very good at killing this monster because they haven't yet. So young and old warriors, everybody goes to see where he has come from. They come back and they're like, yay, Beowulf. But they're very careful not to speak negatively of Hrothgar as their king, because Hrothgar wasn't able to handle killing the monster, but they still think he's a good king, even though he wasn't able to. And some of that might be the fact that the god and the devil are not basically going to be able to engage in battle at this point, because your king is not allowed to engage in direct battle. So they wouldn't have allowed him, even if he was going to fight the monster, they wouldn't have allowed him to as king, because he's not allowed to engage in direct battle as the king. Back to the reading. Now and then, the experienced warriors set their gray steeds to gallop, running a race when the roadways seemed fair or were well known. Otherwise, a thane of the king who had told many tales, and whose mind was full of sages and songs of the old world, began anon to bind words together in a well-knit rhyme, forging his tale, and this thane soon sang quite cleverly of Beowulf's quest. He detailed at length the warlike deeds heard in Sigmund's saga. Therein were many strange things, and he said them all. The Whalesing's wide wanderings, his battles which were never told to the tribes of men, the feuds and atrocities he faced with none but Fitela by his side, and how he never spoke as uncle to nephew of these things as they stood by one another in every conflict. They laid low many of the monster's spawn with their swords. Explanation. There's a lot of talking about Sigmund and like the tales that came of him and how they really didn't like last that long, and what he was able to accomplish, but he's never really got fame. But we'll talk about him next in the next paragraph. We'll talk about him in the next paragraph as well. Back to the reading. After Sigmund's death day, no little fame arose for him, mighty in battle, who had vanquished a dragon that kept the treasure. He, the prince, was under the ancient rock when he ventured the perilous deed alone. Fitela was not with him. Nevertheless, it so happened that his sword pierced through the wondrous worm till the mighty blade struck the water, and the dragon died in its blood. Thus had the fearsome warrior achieved by daring the mastery of the jewel hoard. And the son of Wales loaded the boat, putting the shining gold on the ship's bosom. The worm was consumed by heat. Of all heroes, he had the highest renown among the races of men, and was the shelter of warriors because of the daring deeds that adorned his name. After the hand and the heart of King Hermod grew weak in battle, he was promptly banished and lured into ambush by his powerful foes. He was betrayed to death. Floods of sorrow had weakened him for too long, and he proved a worry to all his liegemen. Moreover, in his earlier days, many wise clansmen mourned the wayfaring life of his warrior, hoping to have help from grief and harm through him, thinking that the sovereign's son would wax powerful and take his father's place in protecting his people, the treasure, the stronghold, and the hero's lands, the Shieldling's home. Hygelac's kinsman here seemed more acceptable to all the people. This other, Hermod, was seized with villainy. So this gives us the indication that Sigmund at some point was like in line to take over a leadership role, but then that was thwarted by somebody else that the people liked more. So he was probably done wrong by not being given his lineage, but the people liked somebody else better, so they let him take over. And that's a little different from other versions. So careful if you're trying to look up answers that those answers won't be the same. Stick to this text. Back to the reading, last paragraph. At times they raced with their swift steeds on the fallow roads. The morning sun climbed higher. Many clansmen hastened to the high vaulted hall, eager to witness the wonder. The king himself, guardian of the treasure, came with regal bearing from his bower with his retainers. His queen and her crowd of ladies walked the path to the fair mead hall. This is a little bit of allusion at the end of this chapter or episode. And it just talks about, the chapters talked about like men racing horses, basically. And that just goes back to the time we've heard of Brecca and Beowulf's race. We see them racing horses here. And that's just from reflective, probably, of just a competitive nature among persons at this point in time. So we will read chapter 14 next, but thanks for listening.